Eli, to you first. You have watched this play out over the last 4 days. What in the world do you make of it?
Well, it's the typical chaos, except it's about something it seems more grave than what we typically deal with. At the White House, there is a lot of confusion and trying to figure out, every time the president opens his mouth, they have to backtrack it. And so there is, even with the president, some understanding that what he did Monday did not work and they needed to do a walk back. But you can see deep within the president's DNA, his first answer is usually what he believes. When he was put on the spot standing next to Putin Monday in Helsinki several times to condemn what Putin did, to accept it, to blame him, to tell him not to do it again, he refused to do it. Almost sort of the childlike stubbornness that we see from this president, who just refuses to follow what his advisors tell him to do, doesn't want to be put in a box. But when he sees the coverage so negative reflected back to him, then he realizes, okay, we've got to walk this back. But even that has seemed half-hearted a couple days ago, saying, well, it was just this one double negative and that should clear it up. And then he responds to the question yesterday and he says, you know, he mouths no several times, and then we're supposed to believe that he was just saying he didn't want to answer the question. It's ludicrous. And this is the sort of back and forth that we see at the president. The president wants to be praised and told he's doing the right thing, and yet he can't get off this thing that he has deep inside him, where he just refuses to really be tough on Vladimir Putin and Russia.
But it wasn't just this wouldn't double negative controversy. Right. Watch the entirety of President Trump's press conference with Vladimir Putin, and to say, well, I just misspoke on this one point is utter nonsense. Malcolm, I want to play for you a bit more. We showed it earlier about what President Trump said about Vladimir Putin in his interview with Jeff Glor on CBS. Take a look.
If you believe U.S. intelligence agencies, is Putin lying to you?
I don't want to get into whether or not he's lying. I can only say that I do have confidence in our intelligence agencies as currently constituted. I think we have excellent people in the agencies, and when they tell me something, it means a lot.
Okay, do you think that gives, Malcolm, the intelligence community the assurance they need? It was just a couple of days ago that Dan Coats, without clearance from the White House, reiterated his statement, yes, the lights are blinking, Russia is still trying to interfere.
Well, the U.S. intelligence community is going to do their job day in and day out without any concern whether the president believes them or not. Their job is to produce information. He's the consumer. And, you know, there's that old saw, that throughout the community that you can lead a consumer to intelligence, but you can't make them think. This president, on the other hand, absolutely flat out does not believe anything that U.S. intelligence says to him, especially when it comes to him in summary form, and it violates the meta-narrative that's in his head about how the world works. And I have to tell you, that meta-narrative is not intrinsic to Donald Trump. That was put there by the Russians. He has adopted, as far back as 2013, he has adopted their worldview. And that's precisely what the Russians have always wanted. And so now he defaults to their position because that's how he was grounded in foreign policy. That narrative of Russia good, their money good, they want to be partners with him, they will enrich him in some way, and everybody else is out to get him. It's going to be very difficult going forward with anything until this president either disabuses himself of this opinion, or until some action forces us to have a new administration.
Okay, but let's be honest, he's never actually going to do that. According to the New York Times, before the inauguration in January of 2017, President Trump was alerted that it was Putin who personally pushed this to help with this cyber attack. And still, even with that interview, Mike Lupica, with Jeff Glor, he says, well, seeing that he is the head of that country, I guess I hold him responsible. I want to show what the cover of Time magazine looks like this week, because it's chilling. It's Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's face mashed together. And we could laugh and say it's creepy, but how serious is it?
Stephanie, here's how you know that he said what he thought the other day in Helsinki. Because when he went to his sanitation engineers at Fox, he didn't think he had to do any cleaning up, okay? And so what you're watching now, like at the next Winter Olympics, they're going to name figure skating moves after everything this president has done over the last 3 or 4 days. And this thing, the Times story today, I was talking to a Republican senator a month after Donald Trump got elected, and he said, I have to tell you, there's a lot of Russia stuff banging around this town right now. And even in the intelligence briefings he'd already had, this senator said, when the subject of Russia comes up, he doesn't want to talk about it.
It's not just Republican senators. I have spoken to people inside the White House, former administration members, who have said the moment Russia or President Trump's taxes enter the conversation, the wheels come off. He does not want to touch it. Eli, I want to share what President Trump said he did behind closed doors with Putin, because remember, they had a meeting for over 2.5 hours, and we have no idea what was said in there.
The important thing, frankly, was the meeting that lasted for 2.5 hours, or almost 2.5 hours. And in that meeting, we discussed many, many things that were very, very positive for both countries.
What tangibly emerged from that conversation? What do you feel you achieved?
I think we achieved a lot. Things emerged out that were very important.
Okay. Things that were very important. He hasn't told us what they are, yet Russia is leading us to believe some sort of verbal agreements were struck as it relates to our military. And it sounds as though the State Department is trying to figure out what that is. What do you make of this, Malcolm?
Well, you know, whatever happened in that meeting, Donald Trump thinks that it's an agreement. The Russians have printed the day afterward that there was a series of agreements on strategic cooperation between the Defense Department and their Russian Ministry of Defense, supposedly something related to the START Treaty, the Strategic Nuclear Arms Reduction Treaty, and relationships between the United States that remain unspoken. No one knows anything about that except Donald Trump and the Russians. And if he cut a deal with them that no one else knows about, they're going to shove that down our throats. Let me tell you, I'm one of the first people in former U.S. intelligence that has actually come out and said Donald Trump has been co-opted by the Russians. And everything that happened in Helsinki, after Helsinki, and technically over the last few years has just done nothing but solidify that. I think he works in the interest of Russia because to him, he thinks they are his base and that it will benefit them in the same way that he thinks that the Republican Party and the people that voted for him. So he's never going to cross them. And whatever deal he made, it's going to become apparent very fast.
Do you think his base cares? If President Trump actually took the stance and said, so what? Vladimir Putin and Russia helped us defeat Hillary Clinton. Isn't that what you wanted? How do you think President Trump's base would take that? Eli?
Well, I mean, just based on the reader feedback that I get this week from a lot of Trump supporters, they don't want to hear anything other than what Trump is saying, which is that he's improving relationships with Russia and that we're out to get him by criticizing or pointing out things that he says that seem counter to American national security interests. And so that is sort of where the Trump base is, even on this, although the difference, I suppose, is that we've seen Republicans in Congress react to this and come back at the president in a much tougher way than we've seen them do really on anything else. Whether that amounts to anything beyond rhetoric so far, we'll see. But as far as the Trump voter, hard to exactly define who that is, but I would say at this point, they're not too fazed by what happened on Monday.
Miguel?
All week long, you have been talking about how he has elevated this hoodlum, okay? And with an economy that's what, the 30th?
The 30th largest trading partner, okay, behind Chile and UAE.
Steph, there is a lot of gaslighting that goes on all the time between this president and his base. But the worst that is going on this week in the shadow of Helsinki is that Putin isn't that bad. And guess what? He is.
Okay, yeah. Malcolm, I turn to you on this then. One of the things they could have discussed in that closed-door meeting is the idea that Robert Mueller could interview the Russians indicted in exchange for Russia being able to interview Americans like former Ambassador Michael McFaul. I want to share what Sarah Sanders said about that.
There was some conversation about it, but there wasn't a commitment made on behalf of the United States, and the president will work with his team, and we'll let you know if there's an announcement on that front.
Okay, and I want to share what former Secretary of State John Kerry tweeted after that. The administration needs to make it unequivocally clear that in a million years, this would not be under consideration, period, full stop. Not something that should require half a second of consultation. Dangerous. Malcolm?
Well, let me use a technical intelligence term to describe my opinion about that.
Uh-oh.
This is crazy. Okay? We do not suborn the Justice Department of the United States to a hostile powers act, their prosecutorial office, which took part in a crime attacking the United States, trying to distribute dirty tricks information, hacking into a political party, and trying to fundamentally break down the establishment of the base fundamentals of the American electoral process. We don't do that. And George Washington, John Jay, all the ghosts of our founding fathers are spinning in their graves. Donald Trump does not know what he's talking about, because in the presence of Vladimir Putin, for some bizarre, strange reason, he seems to become a supine puppy and just go along with every ridiculous idea that he has. He does not and did not speak for the United States at that conference, and people need to hold him accountable.
Well, it's a bizarre, strange reason, or maybe it isn't. Michael?
It's funny. He responded to the reaction about him when he was coming back. But what about the reaction to the shameful idea that Michael McFaul, who served this country, would ever have to go over and be interviewed by the agents of this hoodlum?
What does that do to our whole diplomatic community, our State Department?
No, and you wonder what the reaction would be from this White House if McFaul was someone who had been nice to this president, who had been complimentary to this